All right, good. Joining us for another Microsoft Nova 365 and Azure User Group meeting. Today, October 29th, if I've got my dates right, we have scheduled a pair, but it looks like due to weather issues, we're going to have one person joining us, Christos Matskas, talking about identity platform and .NET development. This should actually be really exciting. It's one of our more technical presentations. And so I'm very excited to get this up on YouTube and start sharing it. Christos.
Sweet. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Happy time zone, wherever you are. And thanks for having me here. I don't know about the super technical session, but we'll try to make it technical enough. Let me start sharing my screen because you know what? We've been talking for all this time and we haven't shared screens. So that'll be fun. Let's see how that pans out.
I was going to get you at some point.
Let me see if you can see my screen because Teams sometimes misbehaves. All
Yeah,
good? Excellent.
You're good there.
I see you nodding, so that's a good sign. Right. And now, before I get started, feel free to interrupt me at any point. Feel free to ask questions, and don't wait until the end. That's what I'm saying. I'm happy to interrupt the flow. Right. And usually I do this as a pair, as you can see on the nice image there. Me and JP discussing the latest on the identity platform on the subway as we're returning from work. I work as a developer evangelist. Usually JP is right next to me doing half of the session and I do the other half of the session. But you know what? You can always catch us online. We tend to stream on Mondays and Fridays at 8 a.m. in the morning. So if you ever have any identity questions, if you want to see us solving problems online, then we're on Twitch and YouTube. At these times, you can join us online. The 45 show, as we call it, it's the Redmond show, in other words, because people are like, what is 45? Like, well, it's the Redmond show because the area code for Redmond. But for those that have a geeky disposition, 45 is also the HTTP code for too early because 8 a.m. is way too early to have a session in the morning. So there you go, HTTP codes for you. So today we're going to be talking about the Microsoft Identity Platform, aka delegate authentication, aka do not roll your own identity system because we do not want you to end up as one of these lovely folks. As you can see here, companies from all different backgrounds, companies from all different types of operations, and businesses have been compromised due to lack of security measures, due to lack of good identity implementation. And I don't know if you know of Troy Hand or the Have I Been Pawned website. He set up a website where he uploads dumps from all these different websites that get owned. So, you know, a website, let's say Domino's, gets hacked. The hackers will take a dump of all the user information and put them somewhere. Troy gets his hands on the dump, he uploads it there, and then if you've registered your account, your Gmail, your Outlook, your whatever account that you use to sign in, then you can go and check if your account has been compromised. So Have I Been Pawned currently has over 10 or nearly 10 billion accounts. This number is from January, so I'm sure we hit the 10 billion accounts that have been hacked. That means that someone out there has implemented an authentication, a login, a logout thing that lacks the right security features. So I don't know if you've ever done it before. I've done it before. In 2007, I rolled out my own authentication and authorization system for a project I was working on because I thought I was better than anybody else. But it's an insane amount of work that goes into adding authentication, adding authorization into a system. And it's not just the username and password they have to manage. It's the how do you do two-factor authentication? How do you do account changes? And all these things that go into the process that, you know, somewhere, somehow, you're going to screw up and then the attackers will find an opportunity to get you. Now, people might say, well, I only have a small forum. I only have a small mobile app that runs something. Doesn't do anything special. Trust me, as soon as you put something out there in the public domain, it will become a target, whether you want it or not, because there are bots, there are tools that scan the internet for things that can be compromised for. So we want you to stay out of the news. That's the whole point. If you are taking anything out of this session, it's just that. Do not roll out your own authentication. Just trust the experts. We have 1,500 people working day in, day out to implement authentication, so you don't have to. So today we're going to be talking about Azure Active Directory, which is neither Active Directory nor Azure. Strange name, but it is our way of allowing developers to implement authentication, authorization, and permissions in their systems. And as I said, we have 1,500 engineers working on this. As you can see, we do 30 billion daily authentications. That's an insane amount of number. And that's something that you don't have to worry about, because whether you have one user log into your system or whether you have millions or billions of users log into your system, we will scale for you. So you don't have to worry about how that gets implemented. As you can see, we have nearly 350 million active users. That means that they log in on the system every month, and over 200,000 organizations with premium accounts in Azure. Now you might say, I'm small, I don't need all that. And that's absolutely fine. What we discussed today applies to everyone from 1 user per day or 1 user per month to people that have thousands of authentications per second. And this is important as well, because there are things that you need to be aware of, like what happens if your users are usually in the US and suddenly start seeing logins from Russia or Europe or China. How is that going to? How are you going to understand that? Like we have ways for you to be able to, not only as a developer but as an organization, deal with these challenges. Where are my users coming from? What are they doing with my system, and what have you? Now, if you are a developer, there are certain things that you need to worry about, or there are certain things that you usually care about when it comes to using identity. First of all is, can I use my existing identity system that my company has? Usually, most of the customers that we speak to, whether it's an Azure only org or whether they're an M365 customer, will have an Azure Active Directory somewhere, unbeknownst to them, which is surprising to us, because if you have M365, if you have Azure, then you also have Azure AD for free. You don't have to worry about that. So from that perspective, if your manager comes and says, hey, Jay, please go and implement something for us, like go and create a new app that needs to authenticate against our org, then you already have a system there for you. Perfect. That's a good starting point. How easy or how quickly can you get started with building authentication? After the demos today, you'll see that with a few lines of code and a tiny bit of configuration, you're good to go. You don't have to know anything. In fact, I don't want you to know anything about OAuth. I don't want you to know anything about protocols. I don't want you to know anything about JO tokens. Apart from the very basic things, I want you to focus on solving the problems. Authentication should be one of the, or usually is one of the 20 other items that are usually on your plate. And I want you to be able to say, you know what, that's a checkbox I can quickly check off my list, and I know that I've done it securely and well. Does it support integrate well with my platform or language? If you are running on Azure, perfect. If you're not running on Azure, also perfect, because Azure AD and our identity platform permeates the Azure space. It goes everywhere. We can be on AWS, we're on Google Cloud. In fact, yesterday I did a blog post that uses Firebase with Azure AD as a backend to authenticate your users. So as you can see, we don't have a dependency on Microsoft technologies. We don't have a dependency on Azure. As long as you can use Azure AD wherever you are. You don't have to run on Azure. You can be on-prem, fully on-prem, still using Azure AD to allow your users and your developers to benefit from that. And does it support advanced security capabilities out of the box? Hell yes. Multi-factor authentication is, easy as one flick of a switch in your Azure AD tenant to implement. Things like from a user perspective, when did I log in the last time? Having the ability to check your logins, where they come from and how they were done and when they were done, it's also a fantastic tool. So for developers, easy to implement and switch on out of the box. Conditional access. When do I want my users to access certain apps and how and from where? Also multi-factor authentication. And I said, if you try to do that yourself, you try to roll out multi-factor authentication yourself, then that is a lot of pain, a lot of dependent services that you need to bring in. We give you all that out of the box. So as a developer, using the identity platform becomes a no-brainer if you already have Azure AD. And if you don't have Azure AD, again, you'll see some of the libraries that we brought in bring this kind of advanced features that I had people saying, can I use this library with identity server or other tools? I'm like, no, you have to use Azure AD. And they were like, you know what? I might think about it now. So what are we giving you as part of this kind of developer journey into the identity platform? First and foremost, reduce sign-in friction, right? We want you to, with a few lines of code, implement identity and move on. If you are using Azure AD, and we'll talk about the other flavors of identity as well that we bring in. If you are using Azure AD, then you also have access to MS Graph, which is an insane amount of organizational data, like emails, calendar information, and that allows you to create rich applications for your end users. If you are creating line of business apps, then usually Graph is the first thing that you pull in to make your applications a lot more rich and interactive, and to keep your users where they need to be. From an IT perspective, obviously get this kind of compliance end-to-end, because your IT team will set up the rules like conditional access. They will set up your app registrations for you probably, and then from that point onward, all you have to do is just you as a developer bring those settings into your app, but you don't have to worry about that. So IT is happy, you're happy, you don't have to manage 5 different systems for identity. And if somebody leaves the company and shouldn't have access anymore, you don't have to go and scramble for disabling their access into your apps. And finally, safeguarding access, not just as a developer, but as a user, as an end user, you want to be sure that your data is securely stored. And we talked about how developers can really screw up things like encryption and hashing. Trust me, people are still confusing what encryption and hashing can do to things. So there are many companies out there, I'm not going to name names, that people have reached out like, why are you sending my password in clear text on an email? And like, don't worry about it. We're encrypting all our data. You see that? Run. Like if your bank says, oh, we're encrypting all your password information, don't have to worry about that. Run. Because it just shows a lack of understanding of how you secure information. In the end, you shouldn't have to deal with these kind of complexities. You shouldn't have to understand what encryption and hashing is. I mean, you could, you don't have to when it comes to identity. So how do you get started with the whole thing? First and foremost, once you spin up your Azure AD tenant, in fact, you probably have an Azure AD tenant sitting somewhere. All you have to do is just go in there and create an app registration. This app registration, in effect, shows the intent, or gives the Azure AD the intent of you that you're going to be using Azure AD as your identity provider. So that app registration says, I'm going to create a web app or a daemon app or a mobile app that needs to manage users, right? Perfect. And you can create that in the portal if you like to use the UI and right-clicking, or you can use the Microsoft Graph, even Microsoft Graph, which gets wrapped also into PowerShell, so you can automate that process. You don't have to do it manually. But in some cases, you might just want to go and see how the whole process takes place. So the app registration is all you need to do inside Azure AD to say, I'm going to use an app that is going to authenticate against my organizational users. Next, you can write some code. Now, we give you libraries out of the box. So the MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication Library, is the de facto way of integrating your apps, and that can be .NET, that can be Node, Java, Python, anything you want. However, we also give you the ability to bring your own OpenID compliant libraries. So if you already have something that uses OpenID, I don't know, Passport for Node, for example, you don't have to use MSAL. You can just use Passport, point to the OpenID certified endpoints that we have in Azure, and then in Azure AD, and then off you go. So you can use our libraries if you're doing file new project, greenfield stuff, or if you already have a brownfield project, something that has been out there for a couple of years, and you want to use that, you don't have to rip it out to bring our libraries in. One important thing I have to highlight here is that I talked about MSAL, which is our authentication library, the Microsoft Authentication Library. There's also ADAL. So some of you may already know ADAL. ADAL is the older Azure AD authentication library. It's our older library that is going to be sunsetted in 2022. In June 2022, that library is not going to be supported anymore. So if you already have apps that you've created using ADL, then now it's a good time to start thinking about how you're going to migrate to MSAL, because we're not going to be supported anymore. You also use the old V1 endpoints. You don't get incremental consent and all the other benefits that you get from MSAL. So something to be aware as we walk out of this session. Now, in some cases, you might have to call an API. That API can be your API or your APIs. It could be a serverless solution running on Azure Functions that you want to securely access. It could be things like a Microsoft Graph, which is also in an API form. It can be Azure resources, like your storage account, and anything else you can think of. So anything that needs to be securely accessed could also be part of that kind of flow, right? So you start with your app registration, you add your code, you add some access permissions to your other resources. Maybe that's a SQL as well. We call it APIs, but it could be SQL. And that's it. Now, I did say that there are certain flavors that you can use when it comes to the Microsoft Identity Platform. Azure AD is the line of business organizational tenant that allows your internal users, your at Microsoft, your at whatever org you are, to authenticate against your apps. And then there are benefits over there. So if your machine is domain joined, then you get single sign-on out of the box for free. So as a developer, you don't have to develop that. But there are cases that you are developing an app for your friend. You might be developing a mobile app that you need to collect information from your users and allow them to manage their profile. From that perspective, we have Azure Active Directory business to consumer or business to customer, B2C. In effect, this starts as a simple username and password database that you can add to your apps. Then you can also bring some external identities such as Google, Twitter, social media logins. And these two different flavors are the top of the tree. So if you come trying to decide what you need to do, if you are writing an app for your company or for your organization, you go with Azure AD. If you're creating an app for your cousin, then you have a forum for his F1 buddies to all talk together, then this is where you bring your B2C solution. So there. Now, there are some other scenarios like business to business and external identities for Azure AD. I don't want to get into that unless you have specific questions. But from my perspective, these two different choices are what help you decide how you move on with your implementation of identity. And they have very similar kind of format, app registrations and what have you. The nice thing about all that is that we're not locking you into some proprietary random protocols. We are built on top of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, SAML and Scheme. So from my perspective, again, I don't want you to know about these protocols, but I want you to be aware that because we're built on top of open standards, you can use any library you want. And as long as you understand how these protocols work, you can do anything you want and move from, say, Azure AD to B2C easily without having to do too much work. I don't know if you have any questions right now, but I think this is a good point for us to jump into a demo. And for this demo, I'm going to, because I think most of you here are probably .NET developers, please raise your hand or let me know if you're not a .NET developer, but the demo I'm going to show you is about the latest and greatest in the .NET space. So up until this point, if you were creating a .NET app or .NET Core app, you had to use the identity system, the ASP.NET identity system that was built inside the templates. You define a new project. I want to add authentication against Azure AD. That was built against the ASP.NET identity system. And then if you wanted to call an API or something else, you had to download MSAL, then pass the tokens or re-authenticate. And it was always a bit of a pain. And you had to write a lot of boilerplate code. Like if I'm creating an API, how do I validate my tokens and what have you, So we decided to do away with all that and provide you with a very simple, unified API. So when it comes to working with our identity platform, first of all, you do the right thing, as in you download one package and does both the authentication and the token management and the token acquisition and all the things that happen behind the scenes without you having to know about them. So for this example, I'm going to create an ASP.NET Core app. Right, let me take a step back. If you haven't heard about the Microsoft.identity.web, it's our newest library that it's built on top of MSAL, and it provides a simplified, unified approach on how you can implement authentication inside your apps. So you don't have to have two different libraries, you don't have to have two different identity systems, and we simplify the process. And you can create web API, anything that runs on top of ASP.NET Core can use it. So gRPC, web APIs, MVC, Razor Pages. What am I missing out? I think I'm missing something out. There's everything that you can do with ASP.NET Core. You can do it with Microsoft Authenticate.web. Right now, we don't have the templates built into Visual Studio. So when you go into Visual Studio, file new project, we don't allow you to do that yet. However, with .NET 5, we're hoping to have that templated as well. So if you need to start right now with that solution, we'll use our command line. So let me clear that out. Is that big enough, or should I make it bigger? Let me make it bigger. So I have a demo folder, doesn't have anything there. And then in here, I'm going to do .NET new web app 2. That's the new template that we have to use, and dash auth. And we'll say single org. So this is me using Azure AD in this instance. You can say multi-tenant, and you can say, or multiple org, and then you can say, I want to use B2C as well. So the same command will go and spin up the project. You use the right template, it restores the stuff, and then I will open this in Visual Studio Code so we can walk through the code. There you go, open. Let's make it bigger as well so you guys can see, or you friends can see. Right, let's start with the basics. In app settings, we have the standard kind of setup, right? You have an Azure AD configuration that expects an instance, your domain, your tenant ID, and a client ID. I think one of the nice things with the CLI is you can actually pass that information, like the tenant ID and the client ID, so it will populate this template over here. I chose not to, right? Then in the startup, you'll notice that we have this line over here, line 32 and 33, which in effect use the Microsoft Identity.web library. You can see here, right? And it's a one-liner. Well, almost a one-liner. I would say two-liners, but it's fine. And this is the one that adds the authentication into your solution. That's all you need to do. Now from here, obviously we say that we also want to use the Microsoft Identity.ui, which is the one that when you say login, takes the user to the login page, and when you say logout, it will execute the right calls. And down here, there's one line extra that adds the authentication into our solution. From a UI perspective, the login and logout are actually built into the DLL, so you don't have to explicitly go and design them. There's only one page in the CERD called login partial, which is at the very top of the bar when you run the app. And then, you know, so we're calling Microsoft Identity. This used to be, I think, Azure AD back in the day, or so this is the only change here. Everything else is the same. So let's go and run this. So it won't run right now because we don't have an app. So portal.azure, just to prove that it works, right? I'll log into this one, and I will select one that, or we can create a new one. Let's see if I have one that has the boilerplate default stuff. So the Microsoft Identity.web makes it super simple to create these things. App registrations, probably have a few million in here. Let's create a new one. New registration, Nova demo. Register that one. Again, at this point, we're only going to do user sign in and sign out, so I don't have to create anything strange or to elaborate. My application is here, so let's add that into our settings. That's the client ID. My domain is cmatskas.onmicrosoft.com, and I need to pass my tenant name. Tenants. That's my directory down here, or tenant ID. that one. Now, the one thing I need to do, obviously, is to add the redirect URI onto the Azure portal. So when I authenticate against Azure AD, my app knows where to redirect the users. So in the authentication, I need to go and add a platform. Here we're going to say web, and our redirect URI will be HTTP 5000, no, sorry, localhost 5000. And I think, so let's add that one. And then I'll add one more URI because I think sometimes it runs on HTTP 5001 localhost. I need to learn how to type 5001. So let's save that one. And if we run this now, say .NET run. This should spin up our app and bring the browser up. My .NET is very slow this morning. Okay, listening, 5000, 5001. Let's hit it. Straight away, I do not have to do anything. The first thing that my app does is expect somebody to be authenticated. So let's go and authenticate with my signed in account. And right now oh, damn. What is it saying? Response, oh, okay. ID token is not configured. Yeah, we missed that one. So let's go back here. Let's fix it. Save. Let's go back and do it again. Okay, I missed one step. So at this point, it asks me to consent to permissions. If I had other permissions to other APIs, it would ask me to say maybe consent to graph, consent to storage, consent to everything else. I will say, yes, I'm happy for my app to use my profile. God damn, man. What is the problem? Oh, the reply URL, there's no must, the reply URL is configured. Yeah, really? Why not? SPS localhost 5000, 5001. Yeah. Well, why is it not happy about it? I'm in the right app, right? Yeah. And I'm running on 5000. Huh, interesting. All right, I'll come back to that later on. Now, let me stop this one and let's go back into our solution just to show you. Maybe this one, that's interesting. Okay. Matskas on Microsoft login. Yeah, this should be okay. Right here, what do we have? We have the whole point here is in the startup. Now, if I wanted to call another API, then I could add it here as well. And you might say, well, Chris, how about APIs? How do they work for us? So if I say cd app, make their demo API. And then here I'm going to do .NET new web API 2, and then dash-auth org. So this one is going to create a web API. Now I want to show you the web API because APIs have this kind of a different approach. You have to validate an incoming JWT token, and then you have to make sure that the permissions that are coming or are being passed into the solution are correct. So first and foremost, start with the startup. Again, you can see that this time we say add Microsoft Identity Web API instead of API. Now, if I were to call, say, a downstream API, right? We could do something like .add some point configuration. Here we can get token. Okay, this one, enable token acquisition for downstream API. This one, in effect, will say to our login, or when a token comes in, instructs the Microsoft.web to go and also acquire the token that we'll need for the downstream API. So if we are, if our web app, let's say a single page app, calls into our API, and then we have to call another API, then this middle API will be responsible for acquiring the token downstream. And then we'll do that one, and then we say, you know what, we want to add a cache, because we don't want our API to go to Azure AD every single time. And here you can see you can have distributed caches, we can have in-memory cache, can have a session cache, and the distributed one can be anything. It can be something like Redis, it can be Cosmos DB. It scales with your needs, right? And then you can also add downstream APIs like a custom API if you want to, all from one line. So let's do the distributed token cache for now. Let's close this one here because I want to jump into the next one, which is the controllers. So in the controller, we have an authorized tag at the top here. So any calls to this controller need to be authenticated properly, but we also want to check that the user that comes in has the right permissions, that it has the right claims. So as you can see here, with a one-liner, we can say, now before you execute anything in this action, make sure that the user or the incoming token has the right claims. So if we check at this one, we are looking here that access as user is something that it's an API permission that we added. Obviously, that needs to be configured. But if you ever had to validate tokens, then you'll know that it usually takes about 20 lines of code to open the claims, check the right claims, make sure that they match it, do some string comparison or whatever, and then move on to return a true or false. So we wrapped all that ugliness into a single line of code. So here, all you have to do is just say, you know what, I'm passing the expected claims and let the code do all that for me. So it's very simple, very, very simple. And you might say, well, Chris, that's not impressive enough. You know, I can roll my own thing, right? You could. So let's see what rolling your own thing looks like if you were creating an API. So here we have an OpenID, I will say artisan piece of code where you had to roll it out yourself prior to the Untitled stuff. So all the things that you see here from line 32 all the way down to line 127, so over 95 lines of code can be eliminated by going whoop, up here. Let's grab all that. Sorry, way too far. My scrolling goes too fast because of my thing. So here you could do something like this, and then say dot add. Obviously, we don't have the Microsoft Identity Web Library here, but add Microsoft Web API authentication. You pass the configuration, and that's you. So 95 lines of code eliminated by one. So if that's not simple enough, I don't know what is, right? So that's the old way, and that's the new way. So I love Microsoft Identity Web because it solves so many problems. It makes working with authentication authorization so much simpler, whether you're creating web apps or APIs or gRPC services. Some caveats, because people tend to ask about obviously these things. Where is it supported? First and foremost, it is supported only on ASP.NET Core and 3.1 and later. So if you are ASP.NET Core 2, or if you are .NET 4 or 4.5 or 4.7, then you don't get ASP.NET Core, Microsoft Identity.web, unfortunately, with your solutions. So going forward from 3.1 onwards, we will make it available to you to use. So .NET 5 is already supported out of the box. And I know that's a little bit frustrating, but we want to make sure that at least all the new code works perfectly with that. If you really want to see it in older versions, I think right now we don't really have the intent to go and backported to 3 or 2.0, then make sure you raise a request or an issue on the GitHub repo, so you can go and leave your comments. I mean, we're super open to feedback. And I know lots of people saw how easy it becomes now to use Microsoft Authenticate. They were like, I want it for all my solutions when I write daemon apps, for example. So this is a demo, right? Let's go back into our slides, which are not as exciting as apps. But one thing that we say about the Microsoft Identity, especially if you've seen our shows on Twitch, it's that we expect you to come as you are. Bring your own developer tools, bring your own platform, bring your own languages and services. We don't really care. And the next slide is a little bit of a shocker, but as you can see here, there's not a single Microsoft technology, but yet we do support all these tools and all these services with the Microsoft Identity platform. So recently we worked with the IntelliJ team to add Microsoft authentication inside their IntelliJ JetBrains. Their JetBrains Rider ID. So if you are working with a Rider, then you can file new project, add authentication, and it works out of the box. Bitbucket and PyCharm can also work with Azure AD. If you are running on AWS, if you're running Lambda solutions, or if you're running anything that needs to authenticate, you can also call Microsoft Identity Platform. You don't have to run in these solutions. And in fact, we support a lot of customers that are running inside these kind of bespoke languages and platforms. So you come to us, we'll make it work. Now, obviously, you can see here, Dan is asking a question, and I'll take this one. If a client or customer has made a big investment in using ADAL core libraries, how big of an investment is to move to the new solution you mentioned? It depends on the stack as well. So if they're on ASP.NET Core 3.1 and later, as you can see, it's super simple. If they are on later technologies, then it is a little bit of work, but we do have the right documentation. In fact, a big effort from a lot of partners and vendors to help in this initiative. So if you know of a customer that has a big dependency on ADAL, make sure to reach out to us and we'll try to help them on board quickly, because for us, it's a big priority and a big target for FY21. But we did it in maybe 3 hours. We took an old ASP.NET project, an ASP.NET MVC project, and we moved it to MSAL. So even though, as you can see, if you're not on ASP.NET Core 3.1, for example, then you have to write a little bit of code. But from my perspective, the migration is pretty straightforward. We just need to devote some time to doing it. And you have to do it because it will be out of support. Now, next, obviously, this slide is all about Microsoft, right? And if you are running on Microsoft tools, if you're running on Microsoft platform, then there are some super great benefits that you get at the back of using the platform. So for example, if you are a developer that needs to speak to some Azure services from their app, you can develop all these things locally in your machine and still call the Microsoft services, the Azure services, without you having to add a single line of username and passwords or storage keys or whatever you need to pass to authenticate against the services, because we have this thing called the MSI, or Managed Service Identity. I think it's Azure Managed Identity these days. They renamed it again, which in effect takes your local credentials and authenticates against that service. And then when you move to production, you can use the production service credentials. So if you're running on a web app, it has credentials that can speak against that service. No code changes. Everything works end to end. So you have this kind of flow of the developer cycle that goes from your local environment to the test, the QA to production, without having to touch the code and change it, and still have a secure solution when you authenticate against services. Then we bring you Graph, so you can benefit from all the tight integrations with the Microsoft 365 platform, like Teams, SharePoint, Exchange. All these are available to you via the SDKs. So if you authenticate with MSAL, then you acquire a token and you can speak to all these services. And if you're using Azure services, then they come with their own identities. You can create custom identities. You can have service principals. And finally, you can bring Power Automate that is also built on top of the Microsoft Identity platform. So IT pros can have super tight control on who can access Power Automate and Power Apps. And then developers can quickly or as they call them, hybrid developers these days, or citizen developers, so many terms, can quickly drag and drop elements, even authentication, add it to their solution, and then off they go. Super easy. So you're running on Microsoft platform, perfect. If you're not running on Microsoft platform, equally as good. So building solutions with the Microsoft Identity Platform, obviously we want to simplify signing. You saw it took 3 lines of code to add authentication and configuration into my web app. I'll go back and see why that was not working, by the way. And we have single sign-on as well. So if I'm running a line of business app, I can do single sign-on. So if my browser actually had that profile for my custom domain, then I could actually sign into my app without having to pass anything. So no credentials. It happens in the browser. Build and tight integration with Windows. Safeguarding access, obviously user provisioning is all managed by the system. So you as a developer, you don't have to worry about where are my users going, how are their data is stored, and how can they reset their passwords or whatever. It's all built into the solution. You can definitely build some new and exciting experiences, especially through the power of Graph and the tight integration with other APIs. And finally, if you are a vendor or if you are creating solutions that you want to sell in the Azure AD Marketplace, then we provide you with publisher verification. So if you say that you're Salesforce, then we know that you're Salesforce. You're not some random person that took the domain name and created an app. And that's very important for us and very important for customers, because if they are downloading an app from the marketplace, then they're confident that the app is what it's supposed to be doing, or it does what it's supposed to be doing. Let's see, next. We talked about single sign-on, and single sign-on works across all the platforms, right? So whether it's a mobile app that has been in-tuned and added to the organization, or whether it's a web app or a daemon app, all these things come with single sign-on. So from your perspective as a developer, you don't have to worry about how to configure that. You just create an app, and then your IT team is responsible for onboarding those devices and allowing the users to single sign-on, and that brings a lot of streamlined experience to your end users. You don't want your users to have to sign into different places all the time. And we did talk about MSAL. So you can develop solutions using MSAL out of the box. As you saw, Microsoft Identity.web is built on top of MSAL, but you can also roll out your own authentication. As long as it's an OIDC certified, then you can use our endpoints and be super happy. Secure by default, so applications that use MSAL are secure by default, and it's any security policies that are implemented by the IT team will propagate down to your apps. So you didn't see this one because I was already authenticated to the browser, but if I signed out and signed back in, you would notice I had to go through, MFA. So even on my test tenant, I can play with MFA and see how this works. And obviously with Graph and Azure, the fact that you can do it securely end to end, from my perspective, this is the important bit, right? You want your developers to be confident that what they develop is securely developed. You want your IT team to enforce that compliance. So I've seen many companies where developers had access to production passwords and secrets because they had to add them into the config files for their apps. And those config files live somewhere. Now you can eliminate that with, say, Key Vault. Like people say, well, I can use Key Vault, but in order to speak to Key Vault, you still need to authenticate against Key Vault. So your app at some point needs to have some kind of notion of where is my Key Vault? How do I get access to that? As a .NET developer, great news. I mean, not just as a .NET developer, I'll take that back. As a developer, the good news is that with MSI, now your app can speak to Azure Key Vault and get all that information without having to pass a Key Vault secret or without having to pass the connection string. If you are a .NET developer, even better, we have connectors for Azure Key Vault. So as your application spins up, it can authenticate against Azure Key Vault. In fact, I wrote a blog post about it. That can bring the configuration settings down and populate your config files with all the settings. But you can also, on demand, in code, use the Key Vault SDK to speak to Key Vault and then bring other information in during runtime. So not only at startup, but at any point you can do that. And that all happens without me having a single secret in my files. And that's very important because, as I said, Key Vault gets scanned every day for secrets and passwords. And we don't want developers to have knowledge or awareness of those production secrets. So this is a quick summary for what I have already covered about Microsoft Identity.web, which is a GA library that went out in September, late September. And you can see if Marcia can do it, then Bob can do it as well. It's a fun slide here. Right, next one. Reiterating, Microsoft Identity.web is built on top of MSAL. MSAL is available for all the languages, but Microsoft Identity.web is the one that is focusing on ASP.NET Core 3.1 and later. And you can see I forgot Blazor. I knew I forgot something important. If you guys are on the Blazor train and you're super excited about creating WASM apps, WebAssembly apps with Blazor, then good news, we support Microsoft Identity.web there. So your life should be a lot easier. MSAL for all the major frameworks and languages. And finally, if you have your own OpenID Connect and OAuth libraries, then you can bring them. So Python, Ruby, Node, they all come with their own packages that allow you to do OpenID Connect authentication. Comparing the old and the new, tired multiple libraries and APIs to learn how to, and protocols to learn. You have to understand how OpenID Connect and different PCs and events they have to hook into to make things work. Whereas the new one, it's a single library, especially for Microsoft Identity.web, that manages both your tokens and your authentication and the permissions and authorization. And it's built on top of ASP.NET Core, so it's beautiful. So you don't have to worry about creating your own middleware and managing things in your app. So you don't have to check everything out if you already have implemented solutions. So Microsoft Identity.web wraps around all these things, but the individual components, the individual libraries that make up the Microsoft Identity.web are still there, and they're still going to exist because we need to provide support for everyone. So that means that if you need to have a custom cookie authentication set up, or if you need to do some stuff with JOT-bearer tokens, anything that you need to customize is available to you, even though you're using the Microsoft Identity.web. We hide the complexities, but we can also surface them anytime you need them. I don't know why, but you can do that. Now we're currently comparing the old code and the new code. So the new one is much simpler when it comes to implementing things like tokens and enabling APIs to work. We also have we've done this one. I should move that. Deleting code from old app. I showed you that as well. Usually JP is doing this. Quickly jumping onto Graph. If you haven't used Graph before, it's an API that surfaces all the different components and all the data that is available to your organization. So OneDrive data, SharePoint information, Dynamics, Teams, Skype, all these different services are available to you through the Graph. You might say, well, I don't really have a good example. I think at Build, Scott Hanselman showed an example where he was using the Microsoft Graph API to call into the Teams availability. So as a person, sometimes I may be busy in meetings like right now. I don't want somebody to be pinging me. So he created this kind of a light system that would reflect what his status was inside Teams. So if he was busy, it would be red lights everywhere, so people wouldn't walk into the room. But if he was available, it would be green lights everywhere. So using Graph, he was able to respond to, and the lights could respond to his different statuses with a few lines of code. So that's a fun project to think about what you can do with Graph. But if I were to jump into the Graph mobile thing, it's let me see. The next slide is this one, like how can you extend it and where you can use it, and a quick demo here. So if we go into our Graph Explorer, it's a great tool for you to be able to play with. So aka.ms GE, as you can see, I've already used this before. If you haven't logged in before, it will give you some sample data, but if you have already logged in, I think this one will probably find it. Yep, there you go. It's like, oh, you're already logged in, single sign-on. See how it works? And then here I can go and get data like my profile. I can get information like my mail. Do I have any mail? I do have some mail. You can also interrogate applications, like creating app registrations or getting information for app registrations. That's for automating things. There's a whole slew of services and capabilities like Teams and Teams Beta, To-Dos, OneDrive. Like, I don't know if anybody has integrated with OneDrive prior to Graph, but it was such a pain. You had to use the OneDrive SDK and it had its own authentication process. It was awful. Now you can do it all that through Graph. So once you authenticate in the front end, you acquire a token for Graph and OneDrive, and off you go. Planner, security, SharePoint sites. You guys are SharePoint heavy, so there you go. And these are just a few examples. Now, there's also, we have a V1 that is the GA one, and we have a beta where we test all the new features. So for example, if I use the beta for my profile, so let's see here, and if I go to my beta and call that, you know, so I get a lot more information. So what we do is we have this evergreen, existing data where we put in the new APIs that we want to test, and then once we're happy with them, we just push them into the V1. But if you want to test, there's a flavor there that's called Graph Beta, both from an SDK perspective and an API perspective, that allows you to call into a lot more information. And you can build some super rich solutions there. So you can have dashboards, you can have custom tasks that go into Graph, and you can automate quite a few things. Okay, so going back into the slides, we covered this one. I have B2C. We covered a little bit about B2C. So hopefully by now you understand the difference. Azure AD is for line of business apps. It gives you Graph and all the other cool stuff. But if you are a Node developer that needs to create an app that registers users, single username and password, if you are a Java developer, if you are Walmart and you want your customers to come in, sign in, and buy stuff from you, then this is where business to consumer comes in, or business to customer. You're creating an app that is external facing, and you want your consumers to come and use your app, or your friends to use your app. Username and password or social media logins, and it eliminates the friction for customers, right? So I can, if I don't want to use my username and password, I can use my GitHub account, or I can use my Facebook account, which is so prominent these days. And the nice thing about B2C is that also allows you to customize the experience. So rather than you being redirected, you're still being redirected to a random Microsoft looking and feeling page, you can make it look and feel like your app itself. So you can go from your home page to the login page, still having the same kind of layout as you can see here, same colors. So totally customized to your app. And then you allow your users to log in and they come back. There's a redirection taking place there as well, because we're delegating the authentication to business to consumer. But at the same time, your users don't feel like they're leaving your site to go somewhere else and come back. So fully customizable. And it's built with scaling in mind. So whether you have one user or whether you're Coca-Cola or Walmart, you can also use B2C to authenticate your users. So as you can see here, again, what we explained, you can have multiple endpoints, you can have a web app, a mobile app that call onto an API, all authenticating via Azure AD B2C. Your customers log in with their favorite OpenID Connect customer. So if you have an OpenID Connect system, or if you want to use a custom one, like we have people using tweets to create social media apps that for their Twitch followers. And because Twitch has an open API Connect endpoint, they can bring tweets inside B2C to use that as an authentication endpoint. So fully customizable. You don't have to use just the out-of-the-box experiences. And you can create all these different flows. So how the user signs in, how the user sets and resets their password or update their account, all out of the box. Again, as a developer, you spend very little time integrating. In fact, it's the same 4 lines of code that I showed you earlier on if you're using ASP.NET Core 3.1 or MSAL to speak to Azure AD business to consumer. And that's me with 5 minutes to spare for questions, although I can hang out a little bit more if you guys want. If you want to find us, or if you have any questions about all the things that we do with identity, all the crazy stuff that we build, then feel free to join us on our shows on Fridays, like tomorrow at 8 a.m. in the morning, or Mondays at 8 a.m. in the morning. And we'll be happy to answer any questions or show you how to build some exciting stuff. Thank you very much.
It's good stuff, Christos. I felt bad when I realized when you started talking about time zones, I felt bad having you kick off a presentation at 8:30, but you do this at 8 o'clock, so I don't feel bad anymore.
Well, you don't have to feel bad because we used to stream at 7
Oh,
to begin with. And hence the name, actually. The 45 came because JP was like, let's do it at 10. It's like, perfect. 10 o'clock is a perfect time. But always check the time zones when you agree on things like that, because it was 10 a.m. East Coast, not 10 a.m. West Coast. So like, how are we going to name the show? Let's name it 4 to 5 because it's way too early for me. But yeah, I mean, we start early, we finish early. We'll try to.
Awesome. Yeah. No, that was a really great presentation. I haven't been in code for a long time. Had some flashbacks there, but it was nice to see. I remember when I switched over from PHP to ASP.NET, and like I remember seeing the amount of code shrink as I moved into the .NET platform, and so just seeing what you're doing, like I can't even imagine what that code looked like a decade ago to do similar concepts.
Awful. I mean, it was. I mean, you had to understand what you were doing, and that's the biggest challenge, or the biggest thing for me, is to simplify it to the point that is stupidly easy to implement, and you don't have to worry about whether you've done it right or wrong. Right? It's I add these 3 lines of code. I know that it speaks to Azure AD or B2C, and I can move on to my next task. I don't want you to spend 3 weeks learning about OAuth 2 or protocols or tokens or whatever. You probably haven't heard me talking about tokens or JOT or whatever, right? Because I don't want you to know about these things. It's you go to Azure AD, you configure your app registration, you add some permissions, and then your code with 3 lines of code is able to go and acquire these tokens. You as a user give consent to the app, and that's you, done and dusted. You don't have to understand this complex workflow. You can, and if you want to, we're more than happy to point you to all the RFCs and what have you, but we have 1,500 engineers working on making this as simple as possible. And usually one of the questions I get is like, when I get it for Node, how can I get it for Python? I love Microsoft Authenticate Web. Like, how can I get the simplicity? In fact, we are working on bringing that simplicity into the other libraries as well. So you should be 2 lines of code, add it, and move on. Identity should be simple. It's not, but it should be simple for the end consumer, you guys, and the people have to log in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was fantastic. Prashant, John, any questions you guys want to throw at our expert here?
I have one, maybe a silly question, but does your approach change at all for multi-tenant applications?
Sorry, say that again?
Does your approach change for multi-tenant applications at all, or is it all kind of on the service side, not the application side? So if you have like one website but hosting 4 different customer bases, or 4 potential split, Azure AD environments.
You can have different policies. So, for example, you can use are you talking about line of business apps or business to consumer apps?
Thinking business to consumer apps.
Okay, well,
business to business apps.
For business to consumer, you can probably have different policies within your solution if you're using .NET, for example. And then based on where you're coming from or based on your domain, you can log into the right policy. For business to business, that's a little bit more advanced, so I will have to look that up. I don't think it has changed though. I mean, if as far as I know, it remains the same. The only big change that we brought in was external identities for business to business or business to consumer, but not via B2C, right? So you have an Azure AD tenant that you want to onboard some guests using their social media accounts. Then that's the big change that we added there, which was external identities. So I can log in with my Twitter account and join contoso.com as an org, as a guest. So that was one of the big changes. And that also changes how B2B behaves. And I think there's some effort to simplify and unify the offerings, because right now we started talking about 4 different things. We have Azure AD, the pure one, we have business to business, we have external identities, and then we have business to consumer. I think if you go to the docs now, you'll notice that the external identities and B2C have been merged in terms of costing. So even though they're different offerings, you still get the same kind of cost model there.
Cool. Yeah, the context I was thinking about was around, say like a SaaS provider like, Salesforce has an app and they want to sell it to an organization.
Mm-hmm.
If the normal path that you follow with the Azure AD, where you can split the AD, I wouldn't say tenant, but you can limit. I don't know. I got to go back into it, but just how does someone who's like a small startup sell to instead of expanding their infrastructure costs, use the same infrastructure but to support multiple different customers?
Right, I see that. Yeah, I will have to look into that app because not a scenario I usually come across very frequently. Cool. And I'm more on the developer side of things. So, but if that's a legit question, hit me up and I can get the right people to respond back to you.
Cool. I can ping you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Christos. Good presentation.
Yeah, thanks for joining us this morning.
All right.
I will share the slides, Jay.
Yeah, that would be great.
You can share them and add them to the description on the YouTube channel if you want, so people can go and download them anytime.
That would be excellent. And I'll also put a link to, I found your article there that you were sharing about Firebase. So
yeah, I saw that. Thank you.
Share the link to that too, as well.
Perfect.
I had a dig. You've got like 3 different blogs that you write on, and that was on none of them.
So yeah, I've been a guest in a few places. Like we work with the Azure SDKs team very closely because identities is a big part for them.
Yeah.
So we do guest blogs there. We have the dev.to, which is our 45 show where we tend to summarize what we do during the week and also write some new stuff. And then I have my own personal blog, which I've been writing for in the last, how many, 8 years now. Yeah. Challenge is like, where do I choose to put the content? Because 45 needs to be there, but finding the right place. You're right. It's a bit confusing, but
I know the feeling. If someone went and looked at my blog, it would be very, very out of date. So I understand completely. Cool. Well, listen, Christos, thank you so much. Everybody who was able to join live, thank you. If you're watching this on a recording, make sure you check the description and join our meetup so you get news of our meetings, and follow Christos on Twitter. And yeah, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.